Welcome grade 8. In this video, we are going to be recapping or reviewing a little bit more about how the grid and coordinate system works. So earlier this year, we talked about an ordered pair. And an ordered pair is an x and a y value that tells us where a point is on a grid or on a graph. So we talked about having an x value followed by a y value, and that is going to be our ordered pair. Now these two values, both x and y, these are going to tell us where a location is on a grid. So let's draw a quick grid here. And this is a 5 by 5 grid. And what I mean by that is we have 5 points going across. So this one kind of starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we also have the same thing going up. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we call each of these lines an axis. So the horizontal axis, or the one that goes left and right, we call that the x-axis, whereas the vertical line, or the one that goes up and down, we call that the y-axis. Any point in between all of these, we can identify using the x, how far left and right it is, and the y, how far up and down it is. For any of you who have ever played the game of Battleship, it's kind of just like that. We're trying to figure out where this point is on that particular grid. So if I had a point right here, for example, that first I would want the x. I would want to figure out how far on the x-axis, or left and right, that number is. And if I go all the way on the x-axis, I see that lines up in the 3. And then if I go, so 3 is my x value, 3. And then my y value is how far up and down it is. And if I go across this way, I see that that lines up with the number 1. So my values are going to be 3, 1, and that is going to be the location on this coordinate of that particular point. Now, this is a graph that just deals with positive numbers, but we're going to deal with graphs that could have positive x values or negative x values, that could have positive y values or negative y values. So the grid that we're going to be working with is going to be a bit of a larger one. So here, I'm still working with the same 5, going 5 up, but I'm also going 5 down. And this is kind of going to be my midpoint. So now I have a lot of different values represented. I'm actually going to put arrows here because although we stopped our grid here, it could technically continue all the way to the left and all the way to the right. Now before, where we had our zeros in the corner, now we have our zeros right here in the middle. So anything to the right of this middle line is going to be positive. But anything to the left of that line is going to now be negative. So this is still going to be our x-axis. And going across, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now when we go the other way, we get -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5. So we're working in the negatives as we go further past that point. This is our y-axis. And it's the same way. As we go above that point, just like we saw before, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, going all the way up here. And as we go down, we do the same thing, but with our negatives. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So I can talk about points now anywhere within this coordinate system. So let's see if we can label a couple. We're going to try, first of all, a point here. We're going to say that that's point A. We're going to look at a different point here, which is going to be point B. We're going to look at a point in this coordinate way over here, which is going to be point C. And then in this one, we're going to look all the way in the bottom here. We're going to call that point D. And we're going to try to see if we can label or figure out what the coordinates are for those points. At home, if you're watching this or listening to this, see if you can figure out before we finish the video or before we get our final answers here. So let's start with point A. I'm just going to write it here on the side. So we want to start, remember when we're doing coordinates, we're going to look for the x first and the y second. The x is going to be how far left or right it is. So this is like -5, 4, 3, 2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I look where that lines up right with that number 2 on the x-axis. So my first value is going to be a 2. And my second value is where it lines up on the y-axis. And if I follow that right across to where the y-axis is, I see that that's right at the number 3. So we would then say that point A is at 2, 3, or 2, 3 is the coordinate for the location of point A. Let's see if we can do point B. Point B is going to take us into our first negative. So again, we start with our x value, but if you see on our x-axis, it's to the left of 0. We call this middle point the origin. It's to the left of that 0 where things begin, and it's 1, 2, 3 spots over to the left, and the value there is -3. So our x value is -3. Y value, if we trace that across though, that's still in the positives. So the y value there is +1. So we say that the coordinates for point B is at -3, 1. Let's take a look at point C now. Point C, we're all the way down here. We start with our x-axis going across, and we see that lines up now with -4. Whereas our y value, or our y-axis, that lines up at -3. Finally, we have point D, and we're going a little quicker now through these. Point D on our x-axis is all the way there at 5, whereas on the y-axis, it's down at -5. So there's a couple interesting things we can see about these different quadrants in this grid. Any value that's going to be in the upper right here is going to have a positive x and a positive y value. Any value that's going to be in this quadrant is going to have a negative x value and a positive y. Anyone down here, both our x and y values are going to be negative. And then anyone in the bottom right, we're going to have a positive x but a negative y. We're going to be using this coordinate system quite a bit in the rest of this unit as we take a look at different points and not only where they are, but how we can move them around. We've done a lot of work with x values and y values so far this year. And in our unit that we're in right now, we're going to learn how to change some of those values, not just as a part of an algebra question, but as a point or a shape that's moving in this coordinate system.